Nowadays, the Memphis Grizzlies haven't been doing so well, a combination of injuries, bad contracts, maybe some tension with the players and coaching staff, basically a bunch of different factors. Back in 2013, which wasn't too long ago, the Grizzlies actually had their best season in franchise history. How's it going, fellas? My name's Andy, and today we're going to take a look at the 2013 Memphis Grizzlies. The best team the Grizzlies have ever had since they joined the NBA in 1995. In the 2012-13 season, they had their best record ever at 56-26. They had their best average net rating for a season at plus 4.32. And they made the Western Conference Finals, the farthest they've ever gone in the playoffs. First things first, let's take a look at their roster. A lot of names that you're familiar with, and what's surprising is that they also made a huge mid-season trade. Near the 2013 trade deadline, the Grizzlies decided to shake up their roster and trade away their leading scorer, Rudy Gay. Gay had been with the Grizzlies for about 6 years and showed a lot of potential early on, but he just never made the jump. His game stagnated about 3 or 4 years into his career, and he never developed the way the team thought he would. 7 seasons into his NBA career, and Gay was still pretty much the same player he was coming in. He was still putting up points, but his efficiency plummeted this season, with career lows in field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, and his overall true shooting percentage. Combine that with the fact that he was taking way more shots than anybody else on the team, yeah, it wasn't good. On top of this, Gay wasn't a good defender, he wasn't a great passer, and his ISO-heavy playstyle just wasn't a good fit. He definitely didn't mesh well on the court with the grit and grind era. But with that being said, the Grizzlies were still 29-15 before they got rid of him, and at that time, some people were confused why they would do that. The team looked like they could compete for a title, so why blow it up like this? When most teams make a big mid-season trade, it usually doesn't end too well, especially for a team that looked fine to begin with. But for the Grizzlies, this trade was exactly what they needed to do. In the Rudy Gay trade, they got back an aging Tayshaun Prince from Detroit, who became their new starting small forward, Austin Daye, who left the team after the season was over, and Ed Davis from Toronto, a decent backup center. Obviously, none of these players could match Gay's scoring ability, but the most important thing was it allowed the other Grizzlies players to get up more shots that would have went to Gay. Randolph, Gasol, Conley, they were all more efficient scorers. In a turn of events, the Grizzlies' offense and defense significantly improved, as they were 24th in offensive rating before the Gay trade, but then moved up to 17th, which still isn't great, but it's a pretty big improvement. Their defense also jumped from 4th in the league to 2nd. Additionally, they started to play more like a team. They started to share the ball a lot more, and nobody averaged more than 16 points per game. The highest was Zach Randolph at 15.4. 6 players averaged over 8 points per game. In addition to their big three, they also had some very good role players. Tony Allen made first team all-defense, and most would say he was the heart and soul of the team. Quincy Pondexter was their best 3-point shooter at 39.5%, and in the playoffs he shot 45%. They had Wayne Ellington and Maurice Spates for half the season, but in January they traded them both away, and in return they got John Leuer. This turned out to be a bad trade, especially losing Ellington, cause the team was already struggling with their 3-point shooting, and it hurt them even more as the season progressed. They were hoping John Leuer can develop into something, but that never happened. Anyway, Jared Bayless was on the team too, and he was an okay backup point guard. There was also Darrell Arthur and Tayshaun Prince. These two were their main wing defenders, and they did a pretty good job. Entering the playoffs, the Grizzlies were seen as being dark horse contenders. Their defense was elite, but the biggest concern was their lack of shot creators offensively. I mentioned earlier that they finished with the 17th best offense in the league, and no team has ever won a championship while being that bad offensively since the 2004 Pistons, who had the 18th best offense. So the odds were stacked against them. In the first round, they went up against the Los Angeles Clippers, the team that eliminated them in the previous season. And after losing the first 2 games this year, it wasn't looking good. But all of a sudden, the Grizzlies backdoor swept them, winning the next 4 games and the series in 6. Their defense was amazing and held the Clippers to just 91 points per game in their 4 wins. They also got a bit lucky too, as Blake Griffin suffered a severe ankle sprain and only managed to play 19 minutes in Game 5 and 14 minutes in Game 6. However, perhaps their biggest stroke of luck happened in a different series. The first-seeded Oklahoma City Thunder were the favorites to win the West, but in the first round, Westbrook got hit by Beverly and suffered a torn meniscus, so he was out for the rest of the playoffs. The Thunder still reached the second round, where they would face this Grizzlies team. OKC had the #1 offense in the league in the regular season, but without Westbrook, the Grizzlies easily defeated them in 5 games. They couldn't crack 100 points in any game, cause they didn't have enough firepower. It was basically just KD, who averaged a ridiculous 29, 10, and 7 stat line, but his shooting efficiency was really bad by his standards. The Thunder had no answers down low for Randolph and Gasol. Moving on to the conference finals, they were up against a familiar foe, the San Antonio Spurs. 2 years prior, the Spurs got eliminated by the Grizzlies in the first round, one of the few times in history the 8 seed knocked out the 1 seed. In that series, we saw Randolph go off, and they had no answer for him. So the expectations this year were similar. Many believed the Grizzlies would beat them again and reach the finals, but in a surprising turn of events, the Spurs swept them. Zebo had by far the worst playoff series of his career, as he averaged just 11 points on a putrid 30% shooting and 50% from the foul line. Yeah, it was a rough series for him. Every time he got the ball, the Spurs would surround him and clog the paints, because they knew the Grizzlies lacked shooting. They could afford to give up a few threes as long as they didn't get beat in the paint. In fact, for the series, Quincy Pondexter led the Grizzlies in scoring with 15.3 points per game, shooting 48% from 3. He was the only guy hitting his jumpers, everyone else was throwing up bricks. The Tony Parker-Mike Conley matchup was supposed to be fun to watch, but Parker just killed him. Conley also had a bad series and a pretty bad playoff run in general. Unfortunately, the Grizzlies season would end here. After the season, they've never tasted the same success. Looking back, you could say that they had a very lucky playoff run. Griffin did get injured in the first round, but the two teams were always evenly matched anyway. And in the second round, the Grizzlies probably would have lost to OKC if they still had Westbrook, but it's not that obvious. In the following season, the Grizzlies and Thunder matched up in the first round, and that was a very tight 7-game series that could have went either way. Regardless, injuries are part of the game, and the Grizzlies still had a great run. And that's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed the video. Even though the grit and grind era is over, I wanted to make this video because of how different they were. During a time of pace and space and super teams, the Grizzlies went in the opposite direction, finishing last in the league in pace and operating their offense through 2 big men. It was a breath of fresh air. Ultimately, they'll be lost in history and slowly forgotten, but it was a fun ride. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.